not counted, but entirely concluded when it comes down to voting. A lot of early voting has already occurred across the United States. Some counties have actually exceeded their 2020 election turnout. And across the board, we have seen a lot of enthusiasm and engagement on both sides of the aisle in this year's presidential election. But Kamala Harris, in a number of battleground states, coming to a point where there has now been an advantage being planted in a way that Kamala Harris might not have been in roughly a week ago. What it shows here is that there have been gains in momentum and trend lines that benefit the vice president that could lead her to victory come in time for the election in a way that's pretty good for the vice president and for her candidacy at large, but also too for down ballot Democrats who are running in Senate elections like in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and House races.
So here we're really starting to talk about the momentum and the momentum as it is in the final days of the campaign, which, if you've been keeping track of the race over the summer, you saw a huge shift of momentum away from Donald Trump and towards the Democratic candidate when Joe Biden was replaced by Kamala Harris, and followed by the convention, followed by a fairly long honeymoon, and then even a definitive debate that was such a blowout for Kamala Harris that Trump didn't even want to do a second debate, right? So that all looks good for her. In the past month, it has not looked quite so good. Things have started to really tighten up, and a lot of the trends, a lot of the momentum has been seemingly going in Donald Trump's favor. You've also got the entrance of a lot of very suspicious polls that seem to be flooding the zone with pro-Trump metrics. And when we're relying on aggregators, as we're going to do today, right, because that's the best the best shot we've got at knowing what's going on in the race, then some of those polls are going to get counted in that. So there's a question whether now the polls might be skewing towards Trump for several reasons, right? We had a race in 2016 which which underrepresented, which showed Donald Trump standing in various states as way lower than it actually was. Now
It was so peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
The overall popular vote actually ended up being 2 million in favor of Hillary Clinton. However, that's not how we choose a president. We choose a president with electoral votes, which are gained from winning states. And Donald Trump won votes in the right states in order to pull out an electoral college victory. We also have 2020 as an example, where Joe Biden looked like he was going to blow out Donald Trump in every single way, but ended up winning by a much tighter margin. We also have the example of 2022, in which the Democrats were favored to lose hugely, in the House and the Senate, and ended up retaining the Senate and only losing the House by a little bit. So you've got mistakes in polling in the past, and in order to sort of make up for these, a lot of polls have tried to just kind of put their thumb on the scale for Trump, making the assumption that the Trump voter is elusive and will not show up in your polling data, and so therefore you got to just always assume that Trump's got a few more points than he actually has, right? So now this might, if the factors that caused Trump to be undercounted before are not in place this year, you might actually end up, and a lot of people have talked about the possibility that the polls are overall skewed towards Trump right now. We don't know, though. We can't tell. We won't know for sure until the election happens.
Across the nation. Now, I've been watching the polls very closely compared to where they were in 2020, compared to where they are nationally, and it has been a wild ride. Many of these battleground states, when it was Biden versus Trump, had massive leads for the Republican nominee, and then when it came down to Harris versus Trump, it ended up being far more contentious. But never more did Kamala Harris hold a lead of greater than 3 points in any battleground state during the duration of this election cycle. Since she became the presumptive and eventual Democratic nominee, same thing there either. Republicans never had a 3-point lead or higher in any of the battleground states, which means that every single state from July has been within the margin of error to a point that really breaks my brain. It's very unlike any election that we've ever seen to see such states, in fact 7 battleground states, so exceptionally competitive and really just go back and forth and swing in directions that really don't tell us weeks out from the election like they used to in 2018, 2020, 2022, elections that I previously covered on this channel. Everything is thrown us for a whirlwind. But what you do pick up on, especially as you get closer to an election, is how the trend lines show good news or bad news for incumbents, for challengers, for candidates at large. And in the race nationwide, Kamala Harris has started to see some improvements in some battleground states. Now, this first started off when we talked about that poll in Michigan rather. I'm switching up my Rust Belt states here, but Michigan, where in particular Kamala Harris was defeating Donald Trump by roughly 5 points. Now, some new polls out of the state too also show Kamala Harris with a 3-4 point lead across the state, which averages out to her doing better than where she was before. And while she may not be leading in every single poll in states like Michigan, she leads in a way in some of the more high-quality ones and the ones that have historically had a higher percentage of accuracy than some of the recent polls that show Donald Trump doing better than the vice president in the state, and that was a good sign for Kamala Harris. But it was enough for me to discuss it in how it related to Michigan. I made a video on this less than a week ago saying Michigan was slowly becoming the better state for Kamala Harris when evaluated compared to the other battleground states.
Which there is actually a lot going against Harris in Michigan, and a lot that's self-inflicted. When you talk about Kamala Harris's weak spot, it is the Biden policy in Gaza, which on some level she can't change, but on another level she really does need to do more to separate herself from Biden's failed policy. And it's becoming more dire than ever now, due to the fact that Trump has been visiting Michigan and just bullshitting people, right? So if you watched my coverage of Donald Trump talking to various groups of Jewish voters, you heard how he really feels about Israel-Palestine, right? He is 100% ready to let Netanyahu do whatever he needs to finish the job, quote unquote, right? So that's, that's not something that Muslim and Arab voters in Michigan are gonna like. However, when he goes there and campaigns, he says stuff like, "I want to get the war over," right? So he's talking about out of both sides of his mouth. In some ways, both candidates are, but because of the perception of Kamala Harris as being attached at the hip with the Biden administration, and her reluctance, her reticence to actually separate herself from that failed policy, the quote-unquote bear hug policy, where Biden tried to give Netanyahu everything that he wanted and then exert, some sort of soft power on him to try to bring the conflict to a close. That obviously is not a policy that worked. She is still, saddled with that policy and hasn't really said anything to differentiate herself. In fact, if anything, she's said a lot that a lot towards a lot that falls under that Israel has the right to defend itself, right? That's not the kind of thing that people want to hear, where there's a huge atrocity going on in Gaza. But Donald Trump isn't exploiting this. He's exploiting the confusion. Elon Musk has also exploited the confusion. His super PAC has bought ads in predominantly Jewish areas, suggesting that Kamala stands with Palestine, and in predominantly Muslim areas, suggesting that Kamala is in the tank for Netanyahu. So there's a lot cutting against Kamala in Michigan. This is probably the whole of her core strategy. This is the one that I would be most worried about if you want to see Trump lose this year, right? The Michigan poll. Now, the blue wall describes 3 states: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. There are 7 swing states, although I guess that might be in dispute now. and those are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And of those swing states, Harris has the best chance in the blue wall states. So these are like the states of last resort. These are the states that Kamala more or less has to win if she were to lose Michigan or Wisconsin, she'd have to replace those states with a state that she's doing worse in, a state like Arizona. She'd have to come from behind in Arizona, come from behind in Georgia, come from behind in North Carolina in order to win. And so, that's why these 3 states are her core strategy. Pennsylvania is a state with so many electoral votes that were she to lose in Pennsylvania, she would have to replace that state with not 1, but 2 states in the Sun Belt. Extremely unlikely. That's why her best bet, her core strategy, and where she's been spending a lot of time and effort has been in the 3 states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And depending on what poll you look at, she is leading in either 2 of those states or 3 of those states. Now, this is a poll that's going to show her ahead in Michigan and Wisconsin, and then tied in Pennsylvania. There are some more favorable polls that give her an advantage in Pennsylvania, although that's not something that I would bank on.
But when you take a look at the trend lines across the board, things are starting to look a lot better for the vice president. And not to say that she's going to slam dunk the election or that she would be guaranteed victory on election day, but you'd much rather be in her position than the former president's if you're looking at the way that the polls are swinging. Because as you get through it...
So he's saying that not necessarily because of like any of the aggregates or anything, but the momentum, he's saying, it seems to be in Harris's favor.
We also saw that today, Marist College released their polls in Wisconsin,
So
Michigan,
yeah, these Marist polls were very encouraging.
and Pennsylvania, showing Kamala Harris with an advantage in every single state. Previously, they had shown some ties. In weeks prior, they had showed Donald Trump with an advantage. And so in their final set of polls for the cycle, they ended up being some of the most accurate in the Rust Belt in 22. Saying Kamala Harris holds an advantage is something that matters. It makes a major difference in terms of our expectations and understandings of how the races might go. And when you start to see it in one pollster, then another pollster, then another pollster, then another pollster, to a point where it's skewing the average more beneficially to Kamala Harris, you really start to understand that where we are right now is definitively a better place for Kamala Harris than a week ago, or potentially even 2 weeks ago. Now, as we start to track the national numbers here, what we're also seeing is a tightening on the head-to-head nationwide popular vote. That Kamala Harris is just 1.2% ahead of Donald Trump, when 2 weeks ago, she was ahead by double that. Now, granted, the popular vote doesn't actually make much of a difference when it comes down to who wins the election. Generally speaking, Democrats have to do better than where they are right now in order to win the cycle. But this race, I think, really is going to throw us all for a loop, not only in the popular vote, not only in the polling data, but also the popular vote, to what it actually needs to be for a Democratic victory. 2020 taught us a
Yeah, Sophia Martinez says she's campaigning with Liz Cheney. So she's chosen a strategy that I don't have a lot of faith in. There was another strategy open to her, a really obvious strategy. If she could get the Obama coalition back together by driving out the base, by concentrating on urban areas, areas that are already voting in favor of her,
Now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
she would have probably had a better chance. Now, would it look like Obama 2008, where Obama just
So peaceful up here.
had a massive landslide? Probably not.
Communist invading
You'd be looking at results that look more like Obama 2012, right? But she has the ability, unlike Biden, to put that coalition back together. She has the ability to do that. Whereas Biden's appeal was more towards older voters and rural voters, or more so than the Obama coalition, more so than this strategy, right? Instead, what she's tried to do as of late is she's pivoted towards a strategy with the assumption that there's this mythical we're going to call them Nikki Haley voters, right? Nikki Haley, if you don't know, ran against Trump in the primary, did better than expected, and garnered some support. There were some voters that really, really, really did not want to go back to Trump. They wanted Nikki Haley. They thought that either Nikki Haley offered them a better chance of winning the election, or they, just really didn't like Trump. There apparently there are Republicans out there like that. When she's campaigning with Liz Cheney, that's who she's going for. And when she does that, she's kind of got her hands tied as far as some of the policies that might have given her a better chance, like concentrating on her plan to stop price gouging, to lower rents, these like consumer and working class friendly policies that she brought out early on, she's kept quiet about those, and instead she's talking about Trump as a danger to democracy. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that was Biden's strategy before he dropped out, and it wasn't working. When you talk about Trump as a danger to democracy, you puff him up. You make him sound big. You play into his strongman strategy. When you make fun of him as being a fucking weirdo, even though, yeah, he is a danger, he's a real danger too, right? But when you concentrate on him just being weird and out of touch, which he is, you tend to do better. So yeah, she's thrown away what works in favor of what didn't work for Biden. And that has me and a lot of other people very nervous. And particularly the strategy of embracing the Liz Cheneys of the world. And even like the last I heard is that some of the Democrats are trying to get George W. Bush to endorse her. I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think this is smart.
Was applicable today, and the Democrats need to win by 4.5 to 5% nationally in order to win the Electoral College. Well, in the day and age of a post-Roe era and shifts in some safe Democratic states where Democrats don't have the means to combat it or just simply haven't allocated the resources to combat it, sure, there is something to be said. The Democrats are losing some ground support in states like California and New York and Florida, and that does bode poorly for the battleground districts there for Democrats in the House and Senate races and state legislative races, absolutely. But when it comes down to the national numbers, all it does really is shift the popular vote. Meanwhile, the swing states are just as close and in some cases better for Democrats than the national margin. And that's what's unlike the past election. You can see that in a number of these battleground states.
So yeah, and very different from the 2016 election. The 2016 election had almost the opposite dynamic going on. You had a large or a decent size, I guess, popular vote lead for Hillary Clinton. And unfortunately, those popular votes tended to be in states like California, New York, states that Hillary Clinton already had locked up, states that were safe. And there were the states that were in contention were the swing states, and Trump locked enough of those up to win the electoral vote. Here we're having almost the opposite effect, right? It's kind of strange how the votes have changed. You're not seeing the kind of margins that Hillary Clinton had in New York, in California, in Virginia, right? You're wait a minute, I actually don't even know about Virginia. Let's strike Virginia off there. But in the safe states, right? You're not seeing those same margins. You are seeing what I would characterize.
But now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
What I would characterize as the Kasperian effect, and that is, coastal liberals.
But now there are freaking communist invading radicals
who in the past had voted reliably for Democrats. There's a subset of them that I don't know consider themselves post-left or intellectual dark web or centrist or something like that, right? That have been convinced to vote for Trump. So you're seeing lower numbers in states like California and New York. Now, they're not low enough where they put the states into contention, but they're low enough where it's substantially less than what you'd see from Biden or from Hillary Clinton. And the good part about this is that you're seeing more votes show up for Democrats in the Rust Belt in particular and in the swing states in general. So
states, they all voted to the left, the right actually of the national popular vote. Joe Biden won by 4.5% nationally, but you can see Wisconsin voted to the right of the national popular vote. Michigan voted to the right of the national popular vote. Pennsylvania voted to the right. North Carolina voted to the right. Obviously, Trump won it, but look at Georgia. Voted to the right. Nevada voted to the right. Arizona voted to the right. All of the states I've just mentioned all voted to the right of the national popular vote in the 2020 election. And so the lesson that was taken away from this was that there was no way Democrats could ever win a presidential election with the margin of victory in the popular vote that Hillary Clinton had, roughly 2.1%. It was sworn up and down that was simply impossible. But what Kamala Harris is proving today is that electoral viability.
Zenol says, did you hear that Kamala Harris is projected to win Iowa? I'd be careful about using language like that, and I wouldn't characterize it like that. I am looking at what we've got a poll from Ann Seltzer that shows Harris at 47 and Trump at 44. As far as I know, this is only one poll, but it's by a pretty reliable source. So, when you say something like projected to win Iowa, that's the language that we use when we count the votes, right? Now, I guess it's possible that could we have a projected winner already? I guess, right? There's a lot more early voting. There's a lot more mail-in voting, and I just don't think that there's a lot of states that are counting their mail-in votes early. So yeah, I don't think we're going to see any projections, right? Remember, projection is what we say when there's like a mathematical impossibility of the losing candidate winning, right? That's what that means, Gerald. But I do know what you're talking about, Xenol. You are referencing an actual poll out of Iowa that indeed shows Kamala Harris up 47 to 44. We'll take a look at that in a second, see what you think. But that is wild, because like I said, Iowa, not one of the swing states. It's a lean state for sure. It's not a super safe state for Trump, but if Kamala Harris were to win Iowa, it would bode really badly for Trump. It would bode really well for the Harris campaign, really badly for the Trump campaign.
Isn't just determined by the national popular vote or what people across the country have to say about you, but rather a more targeted focus on these 7 battleground states that you are showing the biggest difference in the national popular vote versus swing state numbers.
It sounds like copium. King Babuski, I don't blame you for thinking that's copium. It does sound too good to be true, but it's from a reputable pollster. Now, it's one poll, though. Remember, it's one poll. It's not there. Most
So peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
At this point, we have to consider it an outlier until there's more polls showing a tie or a Harris lead in Iowa. We got to think of it as an outlier, but it definitely bodes well.
Or smallest difference between the two, which is fascinating to say the least. Historically, again, very, very different results, very, very different outcomes. Democrats need to outperform nationally in previous electoral cycles. This time, it might be the opposite, where Kamala Harris can win Pennsylvania by 1.5, but only the national popular vote by 1.2. But it seems as if it isn't just the polls that are sort of getting grounded into this new reality that Kamala Harris is starting to do better. Even Polymarket, which I've started to trust a lot less now that it is entirely flooded by right-wing actors. People like Elon Musk are tweeting.
In fact, I feel like I've seen one recently from Polymarket. Maybe we should check on that too. I thought I saw 55-45. So yeah, this is a betting market, right? And people in the past have gone to these kind of markets to look for a projection. And what they're trying to say is that like people with money that they're willing to bet, right, are betting these odds. Polymarket, though, is going to be a little different. It's gotten tweeted out by Elon Musk a lot. So in other words, it's kind of bait for right wingers. Like Elon Musk tweets it out saying this Polymarket is a great tool for projection, for knowing who's going to win. And then of course Republican whales flood the zone and put down a lot of money on Trump. Although I guess according to this, his the money put down on Trump percentage, the ratio of money put down on Harris versus Trump has gone down 5%. Harris has gone up 5.1%. So, and that's going to happen, right? Because this right here is not smart money. Donald Trump never had a 60% chance of winning the election. And so for people to put so much money on him, it's just going to invite people to come in and bet on the other side for an easy buck.
About it every single day, talking about it, about how this is the indicator for the election. A lot of Republicans jumped onto the Polymarket, website very, very close to the election. And so it's very interesting to see just how much money has been put into these betting markets in the final stretch. And a lot of it has been directly fueled by people like right-wing actors who go out on social media and say, If Donald Trump is up in this forecast, he wins the election. And so thus, they invest in him and they want to cash in on that. And they're being told, well, if Polymarket says that Trump is winning, he's winning. So they invest more money in that Trump is winning. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle that ends up deluding people into believing that Polymarket is going to be this neutral arbiter on it. Previously, I did say that I thought the betting markets provided some insight when they weren't being, in a way hijacked by these right-wing actors who looked at it and said, this is an opportunity for me to use this as a marketing ploy, for me to get people to invest their money, to say that this is the way that we set up the expectations for Donald Trump's victory. If you notice anything about conservative media, a lot of them point to the betting markets now rather than anything like polls, anything like forecasts, anything that might show them doing more poorly than what people betting their actual money are saying about this race. But Polymarket, regardless, whether or not Donald Trump is going to win the election or not, has seen some change in direction in favor of the vice president, gaining 5% overnight. And again, back to this point of getting more grounded in reality, because the numbers they're seeing out of some of these states just simply aren't that exciting. And another thing, too, is when you see things like On Message, which is a Republican pollster. They do a lot of internals for the GOP. They showed us some results for the 2024 cycle, Republican internals that show Kamala Harris down 2 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Wisconsin, 3 in Arizona, and tied in Michigan. These are Republican internals. They should be showing Republicans ahead in every battleground state. There shouldn't be even a single iteration of the poll that shows Kamala Harris winning or tied in any battleground state, and that really does make a difference. I do think, though, that there's merit in believing that the race is close and that it is a 2-3-point race, 1-point race, half-point race for whoever actually wins these battleground states. But previously, what we saw, for example, in 2020,
$9.99. I trust in one thing: Elon lies constantly and his pack is so mismanaged. Maybe the king of cap will derail Trump's chances.
Yeah. I mean, now don't forget, he's the richest man in the world. He's got a lot of resources. He can pay ostensibly to hire competent people, but he also is kind of the king of cringe and the king of fail. I just look at his Cybertruck, look at his recent the Wii robot rollout. A lot of what this venture capital movement represented by people like I almost said Ethan Klein. Elon Musk, I'm sorry, not Ethan Klein. Represented by people like Musk and Peter Thiel. A lot of what this is
but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
A lot of their mentality is fake it till you make it, right? And so they try to put forth the
up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
They put their best foot forward to the point of just being utter liars in hopes that their perception as being successful will gain them enough of a investment and enough of a shot in order to win it'll cause like a snowball effect, right? That's how Silicon Valley works. That's how those startups work.
Too, was that some of the Republican internals. A good example is, the recent poll, Echelon Insights. They did one in the state of Georgia back in 2022. I believe it was Echelon Insights or it was another firm. Either way, Republican aligned. They released one this time saying that, Democrats were down about 6 points in the state of one of the battleground states. You flash back to 2022. They predicted that the Republican, who ended up losing that race, was going to win by 5.6 points. And so, again, very much feels like we could be in for a repeat of the 2022 midterms. It's starting to indicate that the Rust Belt is moving back in the direction that is favorable for Kamala Harris. We're seeing a lot of negative press on behalf of Donald Trump. Back in 2016, if you remember the coverage there, it was a lot of negative on Hillary Clinton. The James Comey investigation reopened all these emails, all these things, all these considerations. People forgot about Access Hollywood. People forgot about X, Y, and Z, and they more focused on Hillary Clinton's negatives. We are 4 days out. There does not seem to be a single negative piece about the vice president, and that's because she has stayed consistent and on message. Joe Biden's comment Joe Biden's comment that was taken as calling half of the country, quote unquote, garbage. Obviously, when it comes down to the modern era and digital clipping and taking things in and out of context, you're going to find that people are going to take comments like those and run away with it. Regardless, it didn't matter to the voters, right? It might have enraged the MAGA base, but at the end of the day, Joe Biden's not the candidate. It didn't receive as much national coverage, and that is really the only negative story Democrats have seen over the past week. There is quite literally nothing else. No gaffes, no mix-ups, no incorrect messaging on behalf of Governor Walz, Gwen Walz, the First Lady of Minnesota, Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman, or the vice president, because they are on top of things, and it really much seems that they are running a very strong and tight-knit campaign. And when it comes down to what we're seeing in the data, Kamala Harris leads in Wisconsin by 0.8. A week ago, she was up 0.2. While it may not seem that different, 0.6% is the exact margin and change here, the exact margin the Biden won by in the last election. And so an improvement of that amount gives buffer room for maybe some inaccuracies in the data. In Michigan, too, a week ago, Kamala Harris led in the state by 0.4%. Today, she leads by a point. May not be
So let me show you what people are talking about with this Iowa thing. Krasenstein. Let's see. What do we have? Of course, that's the first one that comes up. 47 to 30 to 47 to 44. Iowa poll: Kamala Harris leapfrogs Donald Trump to take the lead near Election Day. Here's how. And Seltzer. So this is a pollster with a good reputation. But again, as far as I know, this is an outlier, right? So I would not take this to the bank. If this is real, if this poll is picking up real stuff, I would expect other pollsters to come out with similar numbers. We'll take a look at 538 and see what the spread is on. Yeah, it's the poll from the Des Moines Register. So, I mean, as far as I know, I think this is a pollster that polls specifically, it's from Iowa, in general, thought to be higher quality. Here's the pollster themselves, Jay and Seltzer. Kamala Harris now leads Donald Trump in Iowa. Now, if this is true, right, if she wins Iowa, I wouldn't say it's Jover for Trump, but that's a sign that's a sign that other states in the area. Remember, Iowa's in that region. Iowa's is not really in the Rust Belt, but close enough, right? It's an upper Midwestern state, right next to Michigan and Wisconsin. And if things have reversed in Iowa, which is a very strong state has been a strong state for Republicans for a while, not a huge state, not like not like Alabama or a state like that, right? But a fairly strong state for Republicans. So in other words, if you see Florida, right, go to Harris. If you see Texas, go to Harris, right? Then Donald Trump's in for a very bad night, right? And those states might not be as likely as Iowa, but if you see Ohio, right? All of these states that I'm mentioning are states we expect to go to the Republicans. If any of them do not, or they look weak for the Republicans, that's a sign of things to come. That's a sign for a very tough night for Donald Trump. Starting a reversal for Democrats and Republicans who have all but written off the state's presidential contest as a certain victory for Trump. A new Des Moines Register / Mediacom Iowa poll shows Vice President Harris leading the former president 47 to 44 amongst likely voters just days before the high-stakes election that appears to be deadlocked in key battleground states. The results follow a September Iowa poll that showed Trump with a 4-point lead. So it's kind of a reversal from a 4-point lead for Trump to a 3-point lead for Harris. Now, remember also, this is within the margin of error. So while it looks like this is showing Harris with a lead, we figure if we factor in fact, they should probably, if you're gonna mention a poll, you probably need to mention the margin of error as well. But because it's within 3%, this could actually represent more of a tied contest, right? So it's a good sign for Harris. It puts the state in play. But again, I would not take these numbers to the bank, right? I don't think we've seen another poll putting them even or giving Harris the lead in Iowa. So 4-point lead over Harris back in September. June poll had an 18-point lead. Okay, so something is happening in Iowa. But the question is, will it be enough? Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has abandoned his own independent presidential bid to support Trump, but remains on the Iowa ballot. Remember, a lot of these states, a lot of these swing states have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the ballot. Now, obviously, he's endorsed Trump, and a lot of his voters are now supporting Trump. However, you've always got low information voters that don't get the memo. And because Kennedy pulls more from Trump than he does from Kamala Harris, him being on the poll is more likely to hurt Trump. Remains on the ballot, gets 3% of the vote. That's down from 6%. Okay, so yeah, he was 9% in June. He goes down to 6% in September, and now there's still 3% of the people that see RFK, and they're like, I want to get some brain worms. The worms in my brain tell me to vote for RFK.
But now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
Fewer than 1% say that they would vote for libertarian Chase Oliver. Okay, these don't matter.
So peaceful up here, but now there are freaking
okay, margin of error. So this is what's important, right? 3.4% margin of error. So in other words,
but now there are freaking communist invading
this poll, which shows a 3-point lead, that lead is
because it was so peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
That lead, think of it as rubbery, right? It's rubbery. It could be here or it could be here. And since this is only a 3-point lead and our margin of error is 3.4, that's why I say to read this more like a tie than a lead. That it very likely, statistically could be, it could, like, in other words, a tie between Trump and Harris could show up as 47 to 44 Harris because of the margin of error. That's what that means. Or maybe she's winning by, 8 points. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's but again, because we haven't seen any other polls showing her in the lead or even tied in Iowa, I would take it with a huge grain of salt. Yeah, this is what we got: September and then October. Independent voters who had consistently supported Trump in the lead up to this election now break for Harris. This is true across the country. A lot of people are saying that independents are breaking for Harris, which is good news for her. It's driven by the strength of independent women who back Harris by a 28-point margin, while independent men support Trump, but by a smaller margin. Similarly, seniors of 65 or 65 or older are favoring Harris. Senior women by a 2-to-1 margin. Wait, is this in Iowa? That's wild. While senior men favor her. So seniors are this is kind of wild, right? Because if she's winning so decidedly with seniors, that must mean that she's not doing so well in the younger demographics. But anyway, I mean, that's your copium, I guess. Like I said, take it with a huge grain of salt. The registered Democrat, okay, they're quoting voters. Noting the gender gap, which actually 20-point lead with women. Trump has a 27% lead with men. However, women are showing up in at least the early numbers at like 55 to 45 over men. So anyway, yeah, crazy if true. Wild if true. But again, take it with a huge grain of salt. A lot of people excited about this, but again, it's one poll in a sea of polls that favor Trump in Iowa.
Massive, and it isn't a massive swing enough to say this is saving her in the election, but it's showing the direction is moving the right way for the vice president. In a very close and tight race, we know everything's going to come down to just thousands of votes, a handful of votes, going to make a massive difference dependent on just how a few people in a few pockets and sects of some of these battleground states decide to vote and how they decide to vote. All of these things make a difference. All of these things really change how the state's going to vote at large. But again, you don't ignore numbers when they move in the right direction for Kamala Harris. And the only real sign here that the numbers are moving away from her come down to Nevada, and that's because of a 6-point lead here from Susquehanna University. They did a poll in the state showing Donald Trump with a 6-point lead, but some other very reputable sources too. For example, Noble Predictive Insights, which does a great job at predicting Arizona and Nevada, have Kamala Harris up in Nevada.
Nevada is a weird one. Because during the past few elections, there's been signs that Trump or, Republicans were going to do well in Nevada. I'm talking about both in presidential and in Senate elections, right? There's been polling suggesting, like a win for the Republicans, and that when the dust clears, it doesn't manifest. So it's a win for Democrats. Democrats have done well in Nevada for a long time now, and every time it's one of those it's like a reverse Texas. Texas always shows, ooh, look at the Texas polls, maybe the Democrats could win this time, and then they never do. And Nevada's kind of like the reverse of that. It's always like, ooh, look at that, Republicans doing really well, and then it just gets snatched out of their hands at the last minute.
The Times, Kamala Harris up by 1 point. Data for Progress conducted their last polls of the cycle, Kamala Harris up by 2. And even Trafalgar, which is notorious for having way higher overestimations.
Trafalgar, Rasmussen are amongst the... Now, I would say that Trafalgar and Rasmussen, when you're looking closer to the election, they're going to be more accurate, or at least they're going to herd. When I say herd, I'm talking about the tendency of pollsters to kind of fudge their numbers closer to even to show a tighter race. That's part of why you see races tighten up towards the election. And it's really just them hedging their bets and realizing that their best bet for seeming more accurate is to be closer to the middle. So this could be hedging, but also it could be... The overall phenomenon is...
It was so peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communists invading...
The overall phenomenon is that polls that are done to as sort of op, right? Like Trafalgar and Rasmussen, I would say, polls purposely skewed towards the right as almost like propaganda.
Up here, but now there are freaking communists invading.
Will tend to unskew themselves in their last few polls, so that when you look at their track record and you say how accurate is Trafalgar, you're not tracking their overall projections for the entire election. You're tracking their projection for right before the election, and then how did the election end up? How close were they, right? And Trafalgar and Rasmussen, in order to be taken seriously, they have to change their polling at the last minute. So look at this. 48-48.
For Republicans in battleground states, even they are saying Nevada is a tie. And what do we know historically? Nevada has always overestimated Republican support in the state. In 2016, the polls said, even though they were wrong in favor of Hillary Clinton in many states, Nevada was not one of those. The polls said that Hillary Clinton would lose.
Speaking of things like the poly market, April Lawyer says betting markets are inaccurate because men are more likely to gamble than women, also more likely to vote Republican. I never thought of that, but that is a huge skew in their favor. Also with poly market, right? Like I said, it's a huge Elon Musk supported venture.
Nevada to Donald Trump by 1 point. She not only won the state, she won it by 2.4. In 2018, they said Dean Heller, the Republican senator, would win the Senate race. They said that the Republican nominee for governor there would win the Senate race. For the governor's race in Nevada. In both instances, Democrats won. In 2020, the polls said that Trump would win in the state of Nevada. Biden won. You also saw, too, when it came down to a number of statewide races in 22, they overestimated Republican support quite significantly. In fact, I can just flash us back to the 2022 cycle. When you take a look at the Senate races, this was a really good example of why I got jaded based on some of these numbers here. Adam Laxalt had a last-minute surge in the state, was up 1.4%. All the polls, major pollsters, Trafalgar said Laxalt would be up by 5. Remember that. Data for Progress said Laxalt would be up by 2. They now say Harris is up by 2. Keep in mind, all of these firms here, only one in particular, showed Catherine Cortez Masto with a 1-point lead with roughly 10%, 11% of the electorate undecided. So I went with the data points that seemed to direct me in saying that Adam Laxalt was going to win by 1.4%. And it was a standard thing, too. You saw it in Pennsylvania. The numbers changed in the very last minute. Very beneficial for the GOP, all of it. Ended up being a nothing burger. Democrats won in Nevada. They won in Pennsylvania. Georgia is a great example, too, of how that last minute change here, and these are runoff numbers, but when you take a look at the preliminary data leading to that runoff, what does it say? Right? Warnock is up in some, but then you took a look at others, right? More information. Herschel Walker internal. Walker's up by 5.
Avi Cliff says the Vegas market has Kamala up.
Echelon Insights. Walker up by 4. Walker up by 7. Amber Integrated. Walker up by 3. Walker up by 4. A tie. Data for Progress. That other one that shows Harris up by 2 showed Walker up by 1. Right? Again, so really it just...
That's the Georgia race from 2 years ago.
Down to which polls you believed and trusted. But at the end of the day, there are some very clear distinctions here that said, hey, wait a minute. Donald Trump is going to win, or Donald Trump's endorsed candidates are going to win these states. And in fact, in many cases, he simply did not. Well, I will say, when it comes down to states like Georgia, we've seen slight shifts away from Donald Trump, right? 1.8 being reduced to 1.5. He still holds the advantage in some states, right? When you look at my electoral map and my prediction, I gave Donald from Georgia, I gave him Arizona. I think there's a reason for that. I think there's genuine reason to say, he holds the advantage in some of these states. But
yeah, in general, Donald Trump holds an advantage in the Sun Belt states. That's North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and starting to see him ahead more than behind in Nevada. But again, like I said, Nevada's, I'll believe it when I see it. And Nevada's not that big of a prize. In other words, Nevada won't make that difference in very many scenarios.
ultimately, over the past...
It's got 6 electoral votes compared to 16, and 16 for North Carolina and Georgia compared to 15, and 10 for Wisconsin and Minnesota. And the big prize, right, sitting right there, Pennsylvania at 19 electoral votes.
5 days. The numbers that have been released have started to show Kamala Harris winning back that Biden coalition of 2020. Whether it's the Virginia numbers coming on par with what it was in 2020, or New Hampshire showing a 1-point improvement, or Nebraska second showing a 4-point improvement, or Minnesota showing a 1-point improvement. Any improvement from 2020 is phenomenal news for Kamala Harris, because she actually has some wiggle room relative to that cycle because Biden won 306 electoral votes. But ultimately, where we are today in a number of these reputable polls tell us that Kamala Harris could be winning the election today. Not that she will, not that it will be a landslide, but that she has a very strong chance of winning. And in this position right now, if you're looking at it from an objective standpoint, in this closing argument stage, you would much rather be the vice president than the former president, even though it's still close and competitive and ultimately could swing either way. But Kamala Harris today wins the day with the upper hand in improvements in polls across the battlegrounds. So thank you guys so much for watching.
All right, so really quickly, let's take a look at 538. Like I said, it shows Harris up. However, that's the popular vote. And when we look at the projections, we're still seeing Trump winning 50 times out of 100 and Harris winning 49 times out of 100. Now, I want to make really clear, this is not a poll. This is a set of 1,000 simulations that they've run.
It was so peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
Harris wins in 494 of those simulations. Trump wins in 504
But now there are freaking
simulations,
radicals.
which gives him the 50 out of 100, her 49. But remember, like, this is this is Trump having 50% odds, right? This is Harris having 49% odds. So it almost could not be closer. Oh my God. So their current projection is for Trump to have 270 and Harris 268. What is that? Pennsylvania. Wait a minute, that's 50-50 in Pennsylvania. Wait, how are they projecting a slight... Michigan 60-40, Wisconsin 57-43 for Harris, right? Pennsylvania straight up 50-50. North Carolina 60-40 for Trump, Georgia 62-38 for Trump, Arizona 65-35 for Trump, Nevada 50-50. Jeez. Like I said, I mean, this could not, you know, it's basically... Okay, I like to look at the snake, right? So what is this snake? This snake shows each of the states by how much either candidate is winning. So over here, we see Harris, forecast to win 62% of the vote in California to Trump's 38, right? Giving Harris a 95% chance of winning California, which actually seems low. I would say it's like closer to 100, right? Over here on the other side, we see Tennessee, Trump 62, Harris 38, almost like the reverse, right? Yeah, the exact reverse. Over here in Tennessee, giving Trump a 95% chance of winning Tennessee. Now, every state that is over here is a Trump state, or a state likely to go to Trump, but by a less of a margin. Or yeah. So we move from greater margins as we move towards the center to lesser margins. And same thing with Harris, like, right? Maine's first district, Washington State, Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island, Delaware, Illinois, New Jersey, right? So the ones that are interesting are the ones that are right here. Pennsylvania is right on the edge. But it looks like it's kind of pulling to the left. It looks like it looks like more of Pennsylvania. I'm trying to understand why the 270. Okay, so but yeah, it's a 50-50. So yeah, Nevada. So the most likely, okay, so the biggest swing state is Pennsylvania. The most the one that could flip the most easiest, right? Then on Kamala's side, Nevada. Next closest state on Trump's side, North Carolina, 41 to 49, Trump Harris. Wisconsin, 50-50. Jesus Christ. Georgia, 41-49. But they're I guess these ones are slightly tilting towards Harris. These ones are slightly tilting towards Trump. Iowa is all the way over here. They have Iowa at 55% Trump, 45% Harris. That's the aggregate, right? 95. Oh, wait, sorry. I was reading the statistics wrong. 95% of outcomes fall in this range. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a 95% chance. But yeah, Iowa basically less likely than Ohio, less likely than Texas, less likely than Florida, less likely than Arizona. That's why I said if Kamala does actually have a lead or even a tie in Iowa, that bodes extremely well for her. If this poll ends up being right. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. It's incredibly close. That's all I can tell you. Reading the tea leaves, they're giving Trump like a ever so slight edge here, but just not by much. Now let's take a look really quick at Real Clear Politics. That's another aggregator. It's an aggregator that I trust less because they're less discriminating in terms of the polls that they're willing to include. Senate president. That's what we want. All right, so check this out. Their national average, right? Now it's a Republican site run by Republicans, and that I think includes some polls that I wouldn't include in any sort of projection I was going to make, in any sort of model I was going to do. So I'm saying that Real Clear Politics is skewed towards Trump, and even with that skew, they only have him with a 0.3% lead.
But now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
Now, I don't know what top battlegrounds means. The most contentious states, I guess.
So peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
They're giving him a 1.2% average advantage in the top battlegrounds. So what we really want to look at here is battlegrounds, I think. See what Real Clear Politics says. So they give Harris the advantage in Wisconsin, in Michigan. They give Trump a slight advantage, tiny advantage in Wisconsin, small advantage in Michigan, tiny advantage for Trump in Pennsylvania.
But now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
And that's the key state right there, Pennsylvania. It's the Keystone State, and it may be the Keystone State, likely to be the Keystone State in the election if these numbers end up holding up. If these numbers end up correct. There's their tracking poll. So they have had it close. Have they ever had... They've had Harris up for little bits of time, but now they have Trump up by... It looks like a full point. No, actually 1.2. So as much as 538 has Kamala up, right? It's like 1.2 or 1. It's 1.1. It looks like. Sorry, it's not loading for me. That means that a lot of people are clicking on this site. A lot of people are really interested in what 538 has to say. 12 hours ago is the last time they updated. I don't know if they are close to updating again. That's the kind of time that a lot of people will be refreshing. I guess we can refresh as well. See if this. Yeah, the site's kind of slow. Site's kind of slow because a lot of people are looking at this site. All right, let's take a look at the latest out of Let's Talk Elections. We've got 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago. A lot of reports of Trump showing signs of anxiety. You can kind of see that in like what he's doing.
And today officially marks 3 days out from the 2024 presidential election, and Donald Trump has spent the past week visiting a number of battleground states, but also making detours in states like Virginia and New Mexico, completely changing trajectory of where he's going to be spending these final 7 days. And looking at where he's investing his time and resources speaks to a broader problem we have seen exhibited across the Donald Trump campaign since nearly the very beginning of this presidential election cycle. Now, Donald Trump and the Republican Party back in May and June, especially after the presidential debate, announced that they would be investing time and efforts into states like Virginia, and Minnesota, and New Hampshire. And
okay, actually, we just got a new video. This is what I mean. This shit is like... So they're talking about Iowa here. I want to know what Let's Talk Elections thinks about this Iowa stuff. Like I told you, I would say don't take it to the bank. I would say that really understand that 47 to 44 is with a 3.4% margin of error, and that this poll is an outlier. I haven't seen other polls that show Kamala even close to tied with Trump, let alone ahead in Iowa. If Trump loses Iowa, it is probably a sign of things to come. That's a very bad sign for Trump. That's a very good sign for Kamala Harris. But again, we don't know. This could be a mirage.
November 2nd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new poll from the Des Moines Register and Ann Seltzer in the state of Iowa showing Kamala Harris, yes, you heard that correctly, Kamala Harris with a 3-point lead over the former president in this quote-unquote battleground state. The 2024 cycle has been full of surprises for a variety of different reasons, whether it was the dropping out of our president of the United States, swapping out the vice president at the top of the ticket, and a number of different changes that have really come to warp our perception about this ever-evolving presidential race. But nothing more shocking, might I add, over the past month has occurred than this poll drop this evening. Now, first and foremost, I apologize if you're tired of hearing from me today. I've already uploaded 2 videos, and I actually have an additional one slated for 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We are in the final 3 days, so expect a lot of content out for—
Wait a minute. It is 8:30 Eastern Time.
But I actually have to put that one on hold. I'll probably release it
Okay.
around 9:30 or 10 p.m. Eastern Time. This video needs to come out first because this is breaking news. I was actually at dinner with my parents just an hour ago. 7 p.m. Eastern Time was the set title, date and time for the poll drop for Ann Seltzer. I completely expected it to be Donald Trump plus 6, Donald Trump plus 7, Donald Trump plus 8, and it was only going to be really good.
Yeah, like I said, Iowa is... Again, let's just remind you of where Iowa's at in the snake, right? This is a great way to conceive of things because it goes from like the most likely to flip to the least likely to flip. But yeah, Iowa is out here. Like they're giving Ohio better chances to flip, Texas better chances to flip, Florida better chances to flip than Iowa.
Reduce for Kamala Harris if the lead was about 2 or 3 points. But never, ever could anyone have imagined that
Miss Katonic, just understand when you're reading those numbers, right? Like a lot of these numbers you're going to see are there's 2 different kinds of numbers you can see, right? One is a poll. You know what that is. You understand what that is. That means that, like, you know, they've polled the state and they're showing, you know, this percentage for Kamala, this percentage for Trump, right? The other ones are projections where they're saying they're giving the likelihood of and I think maybe the 62-38 might have been a likelihood.
the poll this evening put
Also, Crystal Saphira, thank you for the super sticker.
Kamala Harris with a 3-point lead in Iowa, a state Donald Trump won by 8 points,
Bringing us up to 51%.
due to the discussion around the Ann Seltzer and Des Moines Register poll, and you don't exactly get the hype around why everyone treats it like this gold.
And so that's why I'm not like brushing this away, right? If it was a random poll that had Kamala up by 3 in Iowa, I would say that's an outlier. Don't pay any attention to it, right? This isn't a random poll. This is a pollster with a reputation for, you know, it's a local pollster with a reputation for getting things right.
If you go on Twitter, you'll see so many people talking about how this poll was a big part of their Saturday evening. While some people probably are out on Halloween weekend, or some people are doing both, a lot of us here on the election side of things are watching to see what the numbers actually come in and say. And it's very interesting.
And again, I'm still looking for other polls confirming that. Like, I want to see other Iowa polls that even just show it tied, right? If we start to see stuff like that, then I'll take it seriously. I'll take it more seriously.
Interesting, because this poll drop really did break a lot of people's perceptions about the state of Iowa. And just for additional context as to how accurate Ann Seltzer and the poll itself has been in the past 10 years, we can go all the way back to 2012, where in 2012 they said Barack Obama would win Iowa by roughly 5 points. Now, I actually want to give Ann Seltzer a bit more credit. In 2008, right before the Iowa caucus, she was one of the only pollsters out there to predict that Barack Obama, not Hillary Clinton, would win in the Iowa caucus. And it completely defied the expectations. You saw many reputable pollsters out there saying Hillary Clinton was on track to win the caucus. She did not win the caucus. Fast forward to 2012, she ends up being one of the most accurate pollsters in the state for the state of Iowa's presidential top line. Then in 2014, we saw that the Republicans were on track to win the Iowa Senate race, but some polls had showed it far closer. It was a big deal for Democrats that we saw the Republicans ahead by 7 points, but Democrats swore that it was an anomaly, that it was not going to be the case, and that ultimately the Democrats were going to come through or come closer than a 7-point lead for Republicans. Well, eventually the election occurred, and it ended up being Republican plus 8. Fast forward to 2016, when the polls were saying Iowa was neck and neck. You can look back on Real Clear Politics and many other polling averaging sites that showed Iowa within a point or two on the average. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were in a close and competitive race until they weren't, when Ann Seltzer said that Donald Trump would win the state by roughly 7 points. He went on to win it by 9. In 2018, she missed the mark slightly. She predicted that Democrats, Fred Hubble, if you remember my YouTube channel back in 2018, I actually covered the Iowa governor's race here. We said that Democrats would win there too, largely in part because this poll had said the same thing. And we had seen that the Democrats led by roughly 2 points in the Iowa governor's race. Ended up being a 3-point lead for Republicans.
So it looks like that's the worst call for Seltzer. 2018 governor predicted Democrats having a 2-point advantage. Republicans end up winning by 3. Right, so that's being off by 5, right? Everything else is off by 3, off by 1, off by 0, off by 2, off by 1, off by 1, right?
5-point swing, but nonetheless, still something that had been historically.
I remember 3 points is within the margin of error, so.
Quite accurate. Then you fast forward to the 2020 Senate race. Republicans were up by 4 in the final poll from Ann Seltzer. They ended up winning by 7. And also in 2020, the presidential race, what she also was able to clock earlier than most of the other polling sites, in fact, many of them didn't even make the mark in the final stretch of 2020, was that Donald Trump would win Iowa.
Would I?
So peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
Sinal asks, would I wouldn't take these, you wouldn't take these numbers to the bank. Would you take these numbers to Polymarket? I don't gamble. I haven't even gambled in Fallout New Vegas. That's how much of not a gambler I am. The only time I would ever gamble is if I got really good at something like poker. Like if I practiced, you know, if I played a hell of a lot of poker and got just really good at it.
By roughly the same amount that he won by in 2016. She said Trump would be up by 7, he won it by 8. And she also was able to indicate that the Senate race would be closer than the presidential race. Some people would have expected the opposite. Some people had thought that Donald Trump would underperform Joni Ernst. That's not the case. Joni Ernst and Teresa Greenfield were in a competitive race. Although Joni Ernst ended up winning, the Republicans again were predicted to perform worse in the Senate race than the presidential race. And then fast forward to 2022. A lot of people saw that Chuck Grassley was up just 3 points against his Democratic opponent in Iowa. Republicans spent a lot of money trying to save that race in the final stretch, money that could have been better spent elsewhere. Ultimately, though, we found that in Iowa, that poll that showed Chuck Grassley ahead by 12 in the final stretch ended up being correct, and the race here was decided by 12 points to a T. This is one of the best polls we have out there, one of the most accurate pollsters in the nation for really any battleground state. And so that's why it was so groundbreaking that Kamala Harris has a lead in this new poll. Now, I need to first say, I do not think Kamala Harris will win Iowa, but this is a phenomenal result no matter.
Okay, so even Let's Talk Elections is not taking this to the bank.
How you cut it. Even if you were to give it.
What I'm more interested in, though, is what does this tell us about how independent voters or how undecided voters are breaking in the Midwestern states, in the upper Midwest? I think that's huge, right? Iowa, like I said, if she wins it, that's, you know, going to be a really good night for her, a really bad night for Donald Trump. But even if she doesn't, if she comes close to a tie in Iowa, that tells you that there are a lot of undecided voters in the upper Midwest breaking for Kamala Harris. In other words, that says good things about states like Michigan, states like Wisconsin.
Every single undecided voter and RFK Jr. voter and third-party voter that is in this poll to Donald Trump. At best, he's at 53 to 47. 53 to 47. Meaning that would be a 2-point reduction in support from the 2020 presidential election. That, at base value, is good enough for Kamala Harris, and she wins the presidency on that. But in the event that actually the 3-point lead is true, the results here would be completely out the wazoo. I kid you not. If this 3-point lead is correct, I can show you the electoral map in really swift strokes here. Iowa would be blue, obviously, but so would Ohio. And North.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that Iowa is 6 electoral college votes, right? By itself, it doesn't mean any more than Nevada does. And I told you Nevada in most scenarios does not play a decisive role in the election, right? Because of where this is on the snake. Wait, where's the snake? Let's find the snake. There's the snake, right? Because Iowa's all the way over here on the snake. Iowa, you know, being even close to even, that suggests that maybe she's doing even better in Ohio, which we don't expect her to win Ohio. We don't expect her to win Texas. We don't expect her to win Florida. She'd be lucky to win Arizona or Georgia or North Carolina, honestly, right? These are the swing states. But for this one over here to be anywhere close, right? That says a lot about. So he's saying if Kamala Harris wins Iowa, she will likely win Ohio. I guess so. They're similar enough, right? They're, Midwestern, fairly conservative states.
North Carolina and Georgia and Florida and Texas and Arizona and Nevada. And if it came down to it, based on what this shift actually tells us, it's a 12-point shift from 2020.
So in other words, if this, think of it as tug of war. Let me see if I can find it again. Think of it as tug of war. This is tug of war, right? This is Kamala's side. This is Trump's side, right? So if we pull over, what he's talking about is not just she wins Iowa and we move this one, right? He's talking about if she pulls so hard that Iowa comes into her column or even comes into this 50-50 zone right here, right? That pulls Ohio onto her side. That pulls all these states onto her side. Now, I don't expect to see that kind of night. That's wild. Florida, Texas, Ohio. Maine's second. But all she really needs for a blowout is to pull Arizona into her column. That's a more realistic, something that she's got a more realistic shot at, right? And it would be a fairly decisive election should she win Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, etc.
It would mean states like Alaska would end up going blue in this cycle. Obviously,
Alaska actually came kind of close last time, didn't it?
I don't think that's going to be the case, but it is fascinating at the bare minimum to explore a reality in which it is correct, because it just goes to show how shocking this poll is and how good of a result it is for the vice president.
What is that total then? 416. Wow. Yeah, I don't expect to see that kind of blowout.
And when you take a look, too, betting market odds I've completely thrown out the window as an indicator as to who will win the election, but you can see people are taking this very seriously. Right at the beginning...
I mean, that's just some people taking advantage of an overvalued Donald Trump position, right? That's overvalued. Look at that. It was up to 65, 70%. Right, that's way overvalued. That's way undervalued on Kamala, right? People taking advantage of this to make some money here.
Today, we saw before the poll drop that Donald Trump hit a new high on Polymarket, a 67% chance of victory. It went down a little bit leading up into today, but overall, it was roughly a 25, 30-point lead that had fluctuated over the past week in favor of Donald Trump. Well, just because of this poll alone, you can see a very clear dip and drop. Now Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, just 12 points separates them. And while this isn't phenomenal for Kamala Harris, the betting markets, I don't really think, have that much validity. I do think a lot of people sold their Donald Trump share after seeing this poll here because it actually has never been wrong. That's the problem here for Republicans.
Yeah, the problem is, okay, so the betting markets would be a good indicator if it weren't for the fact that there's so much attention on them. Right? When Elon Musk retweets Polymarket and says this is the tool that I use to to get a gauge on what people's chances are in the election, then yeah, a lot of right wingers, a lot of Elon fans are going to jump on there. They're like, oh, so the better Trump's doing in this, the more greater chance, yeah, and they buy his position, they buy that position, right? And they may very well just be burning their money. But if there was less of a spotlight on the betting markets, then they would be a better indicator, because it would essentially be, people, with putting a real stake on there, right? In other words, it's one thing to say, I think Donald Trump's going to win, I think Kamala Harris is going to win. It's another thing to put $10,000 on that.
They were looking to this poll to hope.
And if you're just a regular, poly market or whatever other betting market is out there, investor, then you're gonna tend to follow the odds that you create are going to be fairly accurate, but not so much this year.
Hopefully put them up by 11 or 12 points. They knew that in the previous poll, Ann Seltzer had said Donald Trump led by 3, but they wrote it off. They thought it would be similar to the 2022 poll that said Republicans were up by 3 in September, ended up being up by 12 on Election Day. But Kamala Harris leading in this final poll, I genuinely could not even have fathomed it earlier on this morning to even think that this would be an outcome. Every single prediction had said the margin of Donald Trump's victory in Iowa is an indicator of what this race is going to do. But no one, and I mean no one, could have predicted that Kamala Harris would be leading in the Des Moines Register-Seltzer poll. This really matters. And so when we take a look at some of our other national headlines and some of our other national polls, it is shocking to me that we could be in a circumstance where the national head-to-head shows Kamala Harris up 1 point and the Iowa Des Moines Register poll shows Kamala Harris up 3 points. Keep in mind, in 2020, Donald Trump won Iowa by 8, but won the national popular vote by 4.5. It is clear there should be a difference there and a discrepancy, but Iowa should be, in theory, voting about 13 points to the right of the national popular vote, what actually would be in line with some of the predictions that Republicans have been putting out, but that's not what we saw whatsoever. I think my takeaway from this is that it does reaffirm many of the beliefs.
Hey everyone,
that we have
welcome to
seen
Let's Talk
from
Elections.
Republicans, or Democrats rather, across the country, that Kamala Harris is starting to solidify some of her support in the Rust Belt regions of the United States, in the Great Plains regions of the United States, that she is able to take some of these states where previously Donald Trump had the upper hand in, that now Kamala Harris is expected to win. Good examples are states like Wisconsin, for instance, where Kamala Harris 58-42, Michigan 65-35. Now, these are just examples of states where, overall, I'm not going to use the percentages because I don't think them to be true, where Kamala Harris, based on what this poll tells us, is going to be in a stronger position, right? When we see some of these data points out of the states now, I'm not going to say that, Donald Trump is going to lose Alaska, lose even Iowa. He's not going to lose that. But what is interesting about this?
Like I said, a big win for Kamala Harris would be winning North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Right? That's what you're likely to see from a surprising, like if the polls are slightly undercounting Kamala, that's what you'll see. And it's a decent size, like what would this be? 276 plus 2. It'd be like a 320. If she gets 320, yeah, that's 320 to 218. That's a pretty big win.
Is that based on where we are right now and based on these data out of the very, very accurate pollster here, it bodes really good news for the Kamala Harris campaign.
And it shows you something's up in the upper Midwest. And I do want to point out though that Iowa and Ohio and Indiana,
but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
They're different states than Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, right? There's more urban areas here, not the kind of imbalance that you see in Illinois, where the huge city here in Chicago, right? But there's a lot more urban voters here, and there's a lot more, sort of an industrial. Sort of has an industrial history, whereas Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, these are more agricultural states. Maybe Ohio less so.
If this was correct too, I mean, if you were just looking at margins, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania would all be likely blue states. I think what we might be on track to see is a high end of a lean blue state in Wisconsin, high end of a lean.
And that's all she needs. That is literally all she needs. Right, this map right here, even if she loses every single other state, look at that, 271, right? That's her most conservative path to victory. That's the most likely path that she would have to a very narrow victory, right?
Blue state in Michigan and a midpoint, about a 2-3 point victory for Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania, should these numbers actually hold up. And I do think many of the undecideds in the Iowa poll are going to break in favor of the former president. But regardless of that, this is the best piece of information that the Kamala Harris campaign could have likely seen right before the election. This is a huge truth nuke, right? 3 days before the election. I know we like to throw that term around, playfully, because it's this idea that
I don't know what this could represent, right? Does this mean that Iowa's got more of those like Liz Cheney voters? Sorry, Liz Cheney, I should say Nikki Haley voters, right? Does Iowa have more, non-MAGA Republicans than other states? Like, what exactly is going on there? Because that's who Kamala's pursuing right now. That's her campaigning with Liz Cheney, her tamping down some of her more like left-wing economic policies and concentrating on Donald Trump as a danger to democracy and as a break with the traditional Republican Party, like that is courting a certain type of voter. And I just wonder if that type of voter is maybe a little overrepresented in Iowa, or is because I don't think it's a good strategy. My read on the Never Trumper Republicans is that they're not very many of them. Right? Trump has taken the entire party. Those politicians still exist, right? But they don't really have much of a constituency. These are the most unpopular people in the Republican Party. But I mean, I guess I could be wrong. Maybe they exist somewhere.
One poll out there that's going to rule them all. There's one poll out there that says X candidate.
One poll to rule them all, yeah.
X candidate is going to do well. And obviously, we can't extrapolate all polls in saying that this is going to be the definitive marking moment, that Kamala Harris is going to win the presidency, the definitive moment at which, Kamala Harris is able to take a battleground state. I don't think that's where we're at. I think what we do find in this poll, though, is a very interesting result that really cannot be ignored. Cannot be ignored by anybody, because it does show Kamala Harris in a much more positive position than really ever before, and stuff like that just doesn't happen too often. It is very rare that we see polls as strong as this one showing a result as against the grain, as I might put it, or against the norm.
Okay, so people that are coming into the Shorts chat in shock and awe of seeing a stream title like this, assuming that this is clickbait, assuming that this is copium, that I've pulled these numbers out of my ass, understand this is one poll from a very well-respected pollster that has Kamala up by 3 in Iowa, and I am as shocked as you are. And I also don't think that it represents like a likelihood that Kamala Harris is going to win Iowa, but it does represent something. It does represent a shift. It does represent like late-breaking undecided voters in states that are pretty red flipping to Kamala Harris. So all in all, even though I'm taking this with a huge grain of salt. Like I said, there's a 3.4% margin of error. So this poll could, it says 44 Harris over Trump. It could be a poll that's off by like 3 points, and the real numbers are more like 46 or something like 45, right? There's every chance of that. And like I said, they're most likely Kamala Harris will not win Iowa, but the fact that she's even close in Iowa, it does say something, and it's a sign of things to come. It's a huge amount of movement on the ground from a reputable pollster, and it's in the upper Midwest, which, if you're counting the swing states, if you're looking at especially the blue wall swing states, it's representative of those types of voters. It's showing movement. It's showing positive movement for Kamala Harris. Does it mean that Kamala will win Iowa? No, because like I said, when we look at where Iowa is actually situated, right? So this is a snake or a tug of war, or whatever you want to call it, right? Showing California on the left, showing Tennessee on the right. California is all the way on the left because California is the highest numbers for Harris, and Tennessee is on the right because it's the highest numbers for Trump, right? And so in between here, we have states that are much closer. We have Pennsylvania, which is 50-50, Nevada 50-50, North Carolina 51-49, etc., right? So when we look for Iowa here, this is where we find it. This is where we find Iowa. Wait, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Feels like you can't. Iowa is because it's right off the oh my god, that's annoying. It's not positioned very well. Here, let's zoom out a little bit. There we go. I didn't even see that you couldn't see that, but there we go. That's Iowa. That's Iowa. All right. So what that means is that Iowa is less likely to flip and go for Harris.
Peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
Than any of these states. Any of these states. So if you really...
It was so peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
So if we envision this as a tug of war, right? And where the election ends up
But now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
depends on what state's right here in the middle. And we just tug Iowa over to the middle.
Peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
If we call Iowa an even battle, that means that Ohio, Texas, Maine second, Florida, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, all these would be likely to go to Kamala. Now, I don't believe that. I think that a good night for Kamala, it looks like this. It ends up at Arizona, right? She wins Pennsylvania, she wins North Carolina, she wins Georgia. She, it's really close in Arizona. Maybe she wins, maybe she doesn't. I think that's a good night for Kamala Harris, right? I think that's the sort of night that's the sort of result that we're likely to see if it's a good night for Kamala Harris. I do not believe that Florida, Texas, Ohio, or Iowa is going to end up on Kamala's side of the tug of war. But again, this is a very reputable pollster showing us a poll of Kamala ahead by 3 with a 3.4 margin of error. So at the very least, it shows us that Iowa is way closer. Because look at this, they've got Iowa forecast to be 55% Trump, 45% Harris. That is 10% for Trump, right? That is 13 points away from what we're seeing in this latest poll.
Completely shattering.
So yeah, take those numbers with a huge grain of salt.
The expectations in the state of Iowa. But in a way, Democrats, I'm sure, invite it. They look at this and say, okay, right, Iowa might be this shocking state. It might not be a Kamala Harris victory. But even if Donald Trump is losing Iowa by 1 or 2 points, mark my words, he loses the election, right? And so this is why I think a lot of people, especially those in the betting markets, again, I'm not here to say that they're valid in saying that, Donald Trump has a 56% chance of victory. I don't think the percent chances on the betting markets are really going to be too reasonable between now and Election Day. But there's a reason. A lot of people are throwing away their Donald Trump bids. You can even see here that it goes from 94% to 82% for Donald Trump. I expect it to build back up slightly. This is really something. 2 days before the election. I mean, I kid you not, there is very little wiggle room and very little time for much to change the trajectory of the races. But this also shows that in the final stretch, when undecideds are making that decision, Kamala Harris holds ahead. And when you break down the poll and what we actually can expect to see out of some of it, it is really quite interesting. Donald Trump had previously enjoyed the support of Iowa's independent voters in the lead up to this election, but independent women now support Kamala Harris by 28 percentage points. Independent women, a huge demographic group that the Harris campaign has made an intentional effort through the efforts of Liz Cheney, Dick.
Yeah. So these are the kind of voters that they're going for right now. I don't know. In my mind, I don't think there's this many, right, what we're talking about is never Trumpers. We're talking about people who were Republicans, Trump took over the party, and they're kind of not happy with it. Are there some voters like that? Sure. But I just don't think there's a lot of voters like that, right? That's why I think it's a bad strategy for Kamala Harris, but...
Dick Cheney, a wide range of...
I could be wrong.
Endorsements from political world to celebrity world to local...
Kamala must lower the price of Faygo to conquer the Midwest. That's right.
World. The Democratic campaign has had a coordinated effort to win over independent women that might have been fine with Nikki Haley, but are rejecting the idea of Trump, but couldn't...
She needs to be going less for the endorsement of President George W. Bush and more for the endorsement of Violent J and Shaggy.
Stomach voting for Kamala Harris.
She gets that ICP endorsement, she's good.
They're now bringing them in to the fold here. They are now bringing them in as real, viable voting bases for the Democratic electorate, and that's what this poll captures. It shows that while there is some slippage in this poll, even here, with Kamala Harris up by 3 from 2020 amongst minority voters in Iowa, white voters make up a significant chunk of the electorate here, and that's where Kamala Harris is really excelling. Independent men break for Trump by a smaller margin. It's not even enough to keep it grounded. Harris won the support of the majority of voters age 60.
I got some confirmation here from Twitch chat. Final Eye says she did literally get the ICP endorsement. She got the Jugulo vote. She's got the. I'll have to pull that up.
She'd be the first Democrat to do that in a very long time. And among senior women, she wins them 63 to 28. Donald Trump just leads senior men by just 2 percentage points. It really is just a fascinating result, one that I just can't even grapple with in this cycle. In 16, it said that Trump was going to win 46-39. And while the percentages weren't fully accurate, the margins here were largely correct. In 2020, they said Trump would win 48-41. The results were 53-45. It was near identical to what it actually was. And so to see this poll today showing Kamala Harris with the advantage, I genuinely mean it has completely warped my perception and understanding of where we are as an American electorate, as where we are in Iowa, as where we are in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and all of these states, because it really is something that has broken the election internet. It has completely warped everybody and how they interact with this race. And so here's what I think. Tomorrow, we will get the final set of New York Times and Siena College polls. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the New York Times and Siena College polls for just the simple reason that sometimes they show some really interesting results. For instance, they'll have Trump up to now.
New York Times in general, as a media outlet, is a very interesting place.
Nationally, but Kamala Harris winning in all 4 states. The Rust Belt.
Like the conventional wisdom of New York Times as being a liberal news source has been massively under question.
That doesn't make sense. That just simply isn't going to happen. And so sometimes I do think they provide some really meaningful commentary. We'll discuss it tomorrow, whether it's good news or bad news for either candidate. I just think, this was a huge, huge piece of information, a very high quality pollster who I do think in the end will be wrong as to who she predicts will win. But she hasn't been wrong yet. And so she will likely be able to prove any of us wrong should she want to do so. And I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if we just saw Iowa shift quite tremendously in favor of Kamala Harris. Not enough to win it, obviously, but enough to keep it in a point of contention, which means a lot of other states are going to be far bluer than what we expect. And so tracking this will be quite...
Minidoc says, fucking elections, how do they work?
The task. It will be very, very interesting to watch. And here's the thing, too, that we completely missed in our market.
How the F do they work?
Conversation around all of this.
Something like that.
Is that Iowa has now become one of the closest states on the national presidential margin. And I know that sounds really surprising. But when you take a look at the...
Yeah, I would say that before I would make the assumption that Ohio, Texas, Florida, etc. are now like really in play for Kamala, I would say moving Iowa to a different place in this tug of war, right? That makes more sense. You just take Iowa out here, you put it, I don't know, put it next to Arizona, put it next to Georgia, something like that.
Expectations and who's leading in the polls, you can see that in some of these battleground presidential races, if we go to the poll tracker, you will find that in the state of Iowa, it ends up being the closest state besides the core 7. Not Maine's 2nd district, not Ohio, not New Hampshire, not Minnesota.
Wow. Wait, what is this? North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona. Yeah, you would put this right between Georgia and Arizona, if you believe this. No, I don't know. This is some other aggregator, I'm guessing.
Not Florida, not Virginia, but Iowa. What was Trump plus 10 in 16, Trump plus 8 in 20, now holds Trump up by just 2%. And now another piece of information I'm sure you just simply did not want to know, but actually does help inform the conversations we have around states like this.
Oh, this is 538. 538 has an average of +2. Okay, wow. I'm actually kind of surprised that any aggregator, like I guess I just hadn't had my eyes on Iowa at all.
In Kansas just a week ago that I didn't cover because I didn't.
Kansas is also a little bit closer than some of the other Midwestern states.
I think it was too meaningful, and I will have to admit, these polls typically in Kansas just don't happen frequently enough for me to say, this holds super strong validity. But it is the Fort Hays State University, Docking Institute of Public Affairs. Essentially here, this is a pollster that back in 2020 nailed the margin of victory for Donald Trump on Election Day. The margin said Donald Trump would win by 12.9%. When you take a look at that final poll here, they said Donald Trump would win by roughly 14 points in the head-to-head race in the state of Kansas. Donald Trump went on to win Kansas by 14.9%. And so this time around, what are they saying? Not a 14-point victory, but a 5-point victory for Donald Trump. Do I think he'll win Kansas? Absolutely. Do I think she'll...
I mean, chat, this is clearly the effect of the Vanguard boys.
be within 5 points? No. But this being the gold standard poll for Kansas, showing a reduction in support that is like what we see in Iowa, a 10-point shift from 2020 in Kansas, a 12-point shift from 2020 in Iowa, it aligns. And while it may not fit the understanding that we currently have of the nation, it does fit where reality likely is.
Chat saying Kansas is not part of the Midwest.
And that Kansas is going to be closer than 20. Iowa is going to be closer than 20, and very possibly this could be the sign. Kansas and Iowa
Wasn't Kansas the bloody Wasn't it bloody Kansas?
could be the sign that Kamala Harris's improvement amongst white voters across the nation will help her win the election and will help her win a number of battleground states. And although I don't think this shock poll will be right in predicting that she will actually win Iowa, I do think it goes to show just how much she has improved upon and what the final stages of the campaign look like for the Harris campaign. Because arguably, they look very good. The turnout numbers amongst women across the nation, the panic and fear rampant within the Republican Party with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, himself fearful. There are so many takeaways here, and this only solidifies our understanding that in the final stretch, and in terms of momentum, it is Kamala Harris's race right now, and it might lead her to victory on Tuesday in the time where she truly needs it the most. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already. And check out the Instagram.
Oh my God, chat.
At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server.
We need to get to the Sam Cedar thing. Let's talk elections. If you want to follow him on YouTube. Good source for up-to-date polling and such. All right, let's take a look at just one more. Like, I think we've got. Okay, so now this is from about 24 hours ago, and as you can see, we just looked at this. It's now 51:49. Or no, it's 50:49. Yeah. So this is November 1st, yesterday at 5:13 p.m. We had the 538 simulation. So they do 1,000 simulations, right? What we've seen, in fact, I'll show you again. It's right up here. We'll even refresh it in case they've updated it. 50 to 49, right? 1,000 simulations. Harris wins 494 simulation of the 1,000. Trump wins 504. Two of the simulations give us 269 to 269, but that's 2 out of 1,000. So less than 1% chance of that happening.
It's Friday, November 1st, 2024, and today we are going to be taking a look.
So remember, these numbers are already a little stale.
At the 2024 presidential election, based on what the polling data says, 4 days out from the 2024 cycle. Now, I'll be doing a conclusive video the day before the election, compiling the averages of every single battleground state, all the polls and what they dictate across the 50 states, and what we can expect to see based on the only data we have predicting this cycle when it comes down to head-to-head matchups. Now, on your screen right now, you are looking at the 2024 election forecast from 538, which hasn't changed too much over the past 2 weeks. It's been pretty consistent. They believe the former president Donald Trump is on track for victory, but it's not a substantial victory. It's 52 to 48, and it really is anybody's game. But 538, luckily, does averages for us across a number of battleground states. They take a look at what the polls really say, and they average it and give us results as to what we can expect using these data points in the head-to-head situation, the same way we do on the forecast, and we also do on the national numbers. Now, on your screen now, we have a 2024 Electoral College map. What I've decided to do in this moment is characterize all of the states that we already know how they're going to go. So I'm not going to waste your time looking at polls from Kentucky and Oregon and New York because, plainly put, we know how these states are going to go. It's a waste of time. You're really here for the substantial swing states and really the competitive nature of them according to swing state polls. And so on your screen right now, we are going to spend the next, however long to allocate 214 electoral votes based on margin of victory based on what the polls predict. And so, for instance, an example of what this margin of victory can be, it's in the description box down below. But a tilt state is a state decided by 0.1% to 1%. A lean state is 1 to 5, and you'll see that as a lighter blue. A likely state is 5 to 15, and then a safe state is 15 points plus. Now, as you can expect, there are no states on this map that are yet to be characterized that will be considered safe. At most, they will be likely states. So we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty as to what states are competitive, how they're competitive, what the margins say, where Democrats and Republicans really excel across the map, and what it says for the overall election cycle. So, 214 electoral votes. Let's go ahead and get through it. Now, the first set of polls we have seen conducted across the map, we're going to work in a way that isn't focused on the 7 core battleground states at first. So throw out all of your expectations about those states right now. Let's look at the surrounding states and what the margins tell us there. We're going to start off in the state of Ohio. Now, Ohio, you might remember if you're an election junkie, how competitive it used to be, but Donald Trump is running exactly where he was back in 2020, and it actually is quite eerie to see just how similar this margin is. In 2020, Trump won Ohio by 8 points. In 2016, Trump won Ohio by 8.1%. Today, Donald Trump holds that 2016-2020 margin, 8.1% across the state. Donald Trump the clear advantage in that, which is quite interesting, if you ask me. Now moving over, the next big one that we're talking about is Texas. Donald Trump holds a 7-point advantage. I'm really going to try to steamroll through some of these more likely states so we can spend a lot of time talking about swing states. But Texas right now, actually an improvement off the 2020 margin, but a reduction from 2016, if that means anything for you. So really interesting to see Ohio on par with 16, Texas underperforming 16, but better than 20. So
Texas is one of these states that has been long predicted to be drifting towards blue. And you do see it as being less red than it was in 2016. However, it looks like that progress has somewhat stalled. And it's like every year there's people that are like, oh no, Texas is going to go blue this time. There is a Senate candidate in Texas that is a Democrat that has a good chance of winning, but that is only because they're running against Ted Cruz, who has negative charisma.
Really interesting to see where we are right now. Virginia, Kamala Harris holds a 7-point lead in that state. No real surprise there. Democrats invested a lot in 2020, invested a lot in 16, invested nothing in 2024. So makes a bit of sense that you're seeing some reduction in support across the state. But we will see, because maybe it's an indicator of a larger trend line here that Kamala Harris is underperforming that of President Biden compared to 2020, as she has thus far in Ohio, Texas, and Virginia. Now moving over to the next state is the state of New Mexico. No real shock here. Kamala Harris holds a 7-point advantage. Another state that Democrats invested in twice in 16 and 2020, did not invest in 2024. It's interesting to watch some of these states that Democrats knew they had some room to fall, right? It would be near impossible for Republicans to make up the double-digit victories that Democrats had in both of these states. And so maybe that contributed to the reason why Democrats didn't invest in these states the same way. They didn't visit these states the same way, didn't put ads out, volunteer bases, field offices, X, Y, and Z. If they lose the election, though, they might reflect on it and say, maybe we should have, or maybe not, actually, maybe if they are able to win some states that, and it ends up being that New Mexico and Virginia end up suddenly shifting in the state legislative races or statewide races. Don't benefit Democrats. They might do some reflection on that point. But honestly speaking, right now, New Mexico, Virginia is still in line in terms of characterization.
These are two states that Donald Trump has been in recently. Not so much, I don't think, because he thinks he can win the states, but New Mexico gives him an opportunity to try to do some damage control with the Latino vote after his debacle in Madison Square Garden, where one of the comedians compared Puerto Rico to a floating island of garbage. Virginia may have more to do with actually the House race. So there's a lot of signs that Trump's internal polling numbers are not encouraging. There's a lot of signs that he's very, very nervous, right? And if you're Donald Trump, what you really want is to win the Electoral College for so many reasons, beyond just the fact that he's a competitive guy. Remember, he's got multiple charges against him. Those are charges that will be adjudicated, that he will have to face and likely be convicted on some. Should he not be elected president. If he gets elected president, he can push those charges to the side. The Supreme Court has basically given the president king-like powers in our country, and he will use those to avoid those charges. The only way that a president can be held accountable is through a impeachment in the House and a removal of office from the Senate, which needs like a supermajority to happen. So in other words, it's not going to happen because Trump owns the Republican Party. There's too many Republicans that will never vote for him to be held accountable, right? So he gets out of all those charges if he wins, right? He desperately wants to win. Now, if you're Trump and you're looking at your numbers and you're seeing something like Pennsylvania being unwinnable, Wisconsin looking bad, Michigan looking bad, right? If you're seeing a blue wall here that you just can't get through, what are you left with? You're left with trying to game the system. How could Donald Trump game the system? Well, it's not going to look like 2006. Donald Trump is not the president. He does not have, his vice president is not the president of the Senate, right? He doesn't have, he doesn't have the mechanisms that he had that last year. He doesn't even have the bully pulpit, right? So he can't try to redo January 6th, but he can do something kind of similar in the House of Representatives, assuming that the House of Representatives, which is seated before January 6th, assuming that that stays Republican. So some of the explanation for Trump's Madison Square Garden rally, his dalliance in states like New Mexico and Virginia, may actually be that he is given up on winning the presidency, and he's going to try to keep the Congress in Republican hands in order for them to throw the race to him. That's one theory. And the other theory would be arrogance, but that one is kind of like left the building at this point. Even he and even his advisors are seeing now that things are not looking. He's not. The other reason would be he's trying to get a blowout, right? And it's just like there's no way that he thinks he's going to win New Mexico or Virginia, right? So there's something strange going on in the Trump camp, and it may be that those internal polls do not look good. A candidate's internal polls tend to favor them, and if his internal polls aren't favoring him, he's in deep trouble.
As to where they were in 2020. The next big state is the state of Florida, where Donald Trump holds a 6.5% advantage. Now, earlier on in the cycle, he had a 4-point lead, 3-point lead. Things have gotten better for Donald Trump. We've started to see an uptick in some of these states. Now, Florida hasn't really seen that many recent polls, but Donald Trump holds an advantage, and you can't really deny that. In my own personal prediction, regardless of what the polls say, Donald Trump is up by...
Look, if Florida loves Republicans so much that they're willing to vote for somebody like Ron DeSantis, there's no way they're not voting for Donald Trump.
A pretty substantial amount. I expect him to win Florida by a likely margin. Florida joins Texas and Ohio, bringing Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to 218 electoral votes. Now, some less surprising ones. We can actually take a look at Maine first and take a look at that individual congressional district. Donald Trump holds a margin. I guess that's not Maine. That is, maybe we can do some switch around here. Maybe if we refresh, we'll get to Maine. Maine's second district is pretty good for Donald Trump. Of the recent polls, he's up by a likely margin, and there isn't really much in consideration here that district will go to the Democrats, just plainly put. When it comes down to the state of Nebraska, it's a bit of a flip case. Both the second district, but Nebraska's second, actually moves in a way that is beneficial for the Democratic Party. So based on the data we're working with right now, Kamala Harris holds a likely margin in Nebraska second. For some reason, it's not loading, but I will have you trust me on this point, because when you look at the data, you can see Kamala Harris.
So for anybody that sounds strange to, Kamala Harris winning in Nebraska, Nebraska is one of two states which apportions its delegates in a non-winner-take-all system, right? California, New York, Tennessee, Alabama, all these other states, right? If you win Indiana, if you get the most votes in Indiana, you get 11. You get 11 electors, right? You win Ohio, you get 17. Nebraska's not quite the same. It's districted out, right? So that first district, I believe it's around Omaha, is actually a district that favors Democrats. The second district, less so. It's more of a suburban, exurban area. And then the district on the outside, the big district, the rural district, that is going to favor Republicans. Maine
but now there are freaking communist invading.
Maine is similar, except instead of having 3 districts like Nebraska does, Maine has 2 districts. A northern district, which favors Republicans, and a southern district that favors Democrats. And then there's a at-large, so it's got 4 electoral votes. 2 of those votes go to whoever wins the state, the popular vote to the state, right? One of those votes goes to whoever wins the first district, the southern district. One of those votes goes to whoever wins the second district, the northern district, right? So Maine and Nebraska apportion their votes in a non-winner-take-all sort of system. So that's why we're talking about Kamala Harris picking up a elector in Nebraska's second. Oh, I guess Nebraska has an at-large as well, and that's going to favor the Republicans.
holds an advantage. 8, 9, 10, sometimes 12 points in a recent poll we saw.
Is it Omaha and Lincoln? I don't know.
District, substantial for Kamala Harris. Now, moving over to the next state here, the state of New Hampshire, Kamala Harris holds a 5-point advantage in this state. So this is actually the first time we've seen New Hampshire move down to being a lean Democratic state rather than a likely Democratic state. So for a while, New Hampshire had been this state where Kamala Harris held a pretty substantial advantage. To be fair with you, right, it is just one poll that really skews it down. The rest of them say it's at a likely margin. Dartmouth has it 21. You have YouGov at Harris plus 7. St. Anselm, which is typically quite accurate, has it at Harris plus 5. So maybe some reduction relative to 2020. But again, looking at the margins here, and also when you look at 22, it's really interesting when you look at the polls there because they far overestimated Republican support. But as of right now, Kamala Harris at a 5-point margin just on the cusp of being a likely state moves down to the lean column. And Minnesota, that's the last one before we get to the core 7. Minnesota, Kamala Harris up by 5.8%. So a bit of reduction of support compared to 2020. But at large here, these states are still staying within the boundaries of being likely Democratic states, the exception here being New Hampshire, but only narrowly the exception. And so now we're down to the remaining 93 toss-up electoral votes. And I'm sure you knew it was going to come to this, that, we weren't at a point where there was certainty around any of these states. The polls here will throw you for a loop. The data we are working with shows a disconnect between how some swing states are voting and other swing states are voting, when generally speaking, based on their margins in 2020, I'm actually quite baffled by some of these results, right? You have found states that have voted very similarly in the last election are further apart now than they were then. And it even just goes to show that what appeals to voters in one cycle may not appeal to voters in the next cycle. What is, swaying portions of the electorate then may not sway portions of the electorate now. And it really does come down to, who is going to be at a position of who can win across the board. Who can appeal to the voters in rural Wisconsin as well as urban Georgia? Who can appeal to the voters in suburban North Carolina and college towns in Nevada? And in some cases, you will find Kamala Harris does well. Some cases you will find Donald Trump does well. But no candidate as of right now is leading in all 7 battleground states. This is very different than 2020, where we started to see some different things pop up. But honestly speaking, it's a really close race and it's a really fun one to watch. But so far, really, really competitive election. So 93 toss-up electoral votes. Let's get started. Let's start off with the states that are a bit more out there in favor of individual candidates. Arizona is a perfect example. Donald Trump holds a 2.1% lead in the state. Now, I am still reminded that Kari Lake was supposed to be governor, should the polls be correct. That Blake Masters should have been a 6-year term senator from Arizona. Didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen was because we missed the mark on something in Arizona. We missed the mark on voters that cared a lot about abortion in a way that we did not expect many voters to turn out based on what we were seeing in issues like the economy and the southern border and gas prices.
The other thing you might be missing out on, and the other thing that doesn't show up in the polls, is the ground game, right? The get out the vote efforts by the respective campaigns. And in Arizona, the Republicans get out the vote. Their ground game is run by Turning Point USA, who has been responsible for the unexpected losses of, candidates like Kari Lake, candidates like Blake Masters. Now, these are far-right, QAnon, weirdo candidates, or in the case of Blake Masters, another Peter Thiel puppet a la J.D. Vance. But there's some chance that if Arizona doesn't swing the way that it's projected to, if it's not an easy win for Trump, because Let's Talk Elections just said, Trump's ahead by over 2 points in that one. That's one of the bigger leads that anybody has in these swing states as far as the aggregates go. If it turns out to, if it swings blue, right, it might tell you that either Trump's ground game is super weak or the Democrats' ground game is super good. So
all of these things that came into these compounding factors as to what we thought would matter to the American public and did matter to them according to the polls ended up being a little bit different than how people actually voted and why they voted on Election Day in 22. Just something I think about. I also am reminded that in 2020, Biden was supposed to win Arizona by 3 points. He only won it by 0.3 points. Massive reduction based on what the polls had said. Sure, they predicted the eventual winner correctly, but they also underestimated the former president. I don't know where we're at in the polls, but I'm not here to argue with them. I'm here to display them and analyze them based on what they're telling us. Right now, they say Donald Trump wins the state by a lean margin. My actual prediction, I still have Donald Trump winning it, just by a slightly less amount. But Arizona and its 11 electoral votes go to Donald Trump nonetheless. Georgia's in a similar camp. While the results here are a bit better than where they were 2 weeks ago for Kamala Harris, it's not at a point where it has tightened up just yet. Georgia right now, Kamala Harris is down against Donald Trump 1.5% across the state. Georgia, Arizona, Donald Trump holds the advantage, moves him up to 246 electoral votes. It really isn't that shocking that we've seen the general trend across many of these states. New Hampshire is a good example. Minnesota is a good example. How we've seen slight reductions in support from the last cycle. Sure.
Buzz Aldrin is still alive.
The investments in the states aren't as strong, and that makes sense.
Buzz Aldrin endorsed Trump.
But for
Wow.
Georgia and Arizona to be shifting roughly on par is a general indicator that, hey, wait a minute. Donald Trump's in a good position relative to the last cycle. a good position is enough to win the election. And maybe the margins can shift enough here that Donald Trump actually wins the states, enough to reach 270 electoral votes. That's yet to be seen, but so far, he's off to a good start. North Carolina is the next state to look at, where Donald Trump, if we can actually get the numbers here, should be leading in this state by roughly a point. There's something really off today about me getting to the data points across the...
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying 538 is... There's a lot of people hitting F5.
The state, the 538 website here, but if you can just zoom in right here, you'll see the North Carolina, Donald Trump holds just the narrowest advantage here, roughly 1 point across the state. Not substantial enough to say, this is a massive victory for Donald Trump. If anything, it's actually a reduction in support compared to the last cycle, but even then, North Carolina, regardless, still that tough nut to crack for Democrats, still don't crack it in 2024. 16 electoral votes to Donald Trump and his campaign. And so now we're down to Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I actually want to do Nevada first and then move to the Rust Belt so we can talk about those 3 states together. Nevada, as of right now, Donald Trump holds a 0.4% advantage. Now, not necessarily the best trend line here. It is a lot skewed by the Susquehanna University poll that shows Donald Trump with a 6-point advantage across the state. Keep in mind that we had seen in previous cycles that they had predicted that Adam Laxalt, the Republican nominee for Senate, would win by 5. He ended up losing across the state. So right now, sure, Donald Trump holds that upper hand. I will say that Nevada's a pesky one, and I say this every cycle because Nevada consistently overestimates Republican support, and I wouldn't be shocked if that trend continued because it started in 2008, 2010, 2012, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, and potentially, if it continues and keeps up, 24. So eye on that one. Right now, though, Donald Trump state according to...
And Nevada is incredibly hard to pull. There's a lot of turnover as far as people living in the Vegas and the Reno areas. And so the addresses that they have for voters in Nevada often turn out to be wrong. So, it's a difficult one to pull. They've also, there's been a lot of predictions of Republicans winning in Nevada for the past few years, and it has never come to fruition. So
the polls. And so in the remaining 44 Tossup electoral votes, what we know about the blue wall, red wall, whatever you want to call it, these are 3 states that have voted together since 1988. They have never once deviated in a way that just simply, they just don't change. Wisconsin will vote the same way as Michigan, and Michigan will vote the same way as Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania will vote the same way as everybody else.
Yeah, and the one time that you're going to break that rule is when the margins are as close as they are right now. So even though that is a trend that is held, I guess, for 40 years or whatever since the 80s, if it's going to, there's a very good chance it might break, right? And that would be bad for Kamala. Her most likely path to victory, right? Her most conservative path to victory, she wants to get 271 electoral votes, is Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And so she needs all of those.
These 3 states have voted together, with each other, and this cycle, that might break apart.
Buzz Aldrin is supporting the candidate preferred by the flat earthers. True.
At least according to the polls. Take a look at what we see in the state of Michigan. Kamala Harris holds a 1-point advantage. That's good for the Democratic campaign. It's less than it was in 2020, again, on par with some of the reductions in some other battleground states, but it's still a victory nonetheless. But it isn't enough. It is never enough, because Michigan alone cannot put Kamala Harris over the finish line. What about Wisconsin? Actually an improvement off the 2020 margin, a bit different than what you might expect. Okay, Wisconsin goes to Kamala Harris by 0.8%. Where does that put her? 251 to Donald Trump's 268. So where does it come down to? Well, as we can expect, and I'm sure you did expect, the battleground state of Pennsylvania, that at headline is a tie, but in actual margin is a narrow Donald Trump victory in the state. 0.2%, putting him at 287 electoral votes.
So this is 538, and we were asking before, why does 538 favor Trump by the ever so slight margin over Kamala Harris? And there's your answer, I guess. Let's reload it one more time. Yeah, it still has not updated again. I think it last updated like 12 hours ago, so still at 50 to 49, very close margin, and see if we can grab those Pennsylvania numbers. Look at that. That's actually 50-50, but if we look at it closer, it's out of 1,000 simulations, Trump wins 504 of those times.
Narwhal_by super chatted $10. Can you please put a link to this channel in shorts?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because it was so peaceful up here, but now there are freaking communist invading radicals.
You mean the channel, right? Not to 538. But yeah, like incredibly close. Let's see what look at this. What the fuck? Wait a minute. They actually don't show, they show like a even, polling average has Republicans up by 0.1. Adjusted polling average has the Republicans up by 0.1. Forecast 0.1. How Pennsylvania's voted in the past. Like, I just, like, really, it's 50-50? That's wild. All right, I don't know where he's getting his polling average that has the Republicans, that has Trump up by like 0.4 or 0.2 or whatever, but
the polls here right now tell us that Donald Trump is doing well compared to 2020, phenomenally better than 2020. Does perform worse than the 2016 election, but it's a race that Donald Trump wins nonetheless. Now, the polls here go to show the Democrats, as much as they seem to be enthusiastic and confident they will win, the data says Donald Trump has the election. Does it say he has it by a lot? Absolutely not. Pennsylvania being 0.4%, that's not anything, really, in the grand scheme of things. That is well within the margin of error. Margin of error is typically 3.5%, which means it really could go either direction. Though the aggregate says Donald Trump holds that narrow advantage. In Nevada, we see the same thing. 0.2% advantage, very narrow advantage for the Trump campaign in that battleground state. Is it enough to say that, Donald Trump will be guaranteed to win it? Absolutely not. Meaning that, in theory, Kamala Harris, just outperforming her current polls by just 1 percentage point, would win the election. Same thing for Donald Trump. It's really interesting. This is a cycle at which, a 1% difference in the polls can make all the difference between the election winner. That was not the case in 16. That was not the case in 20. That was not the case in 12. That was not the case in 2008. Quite frankly, it was not even the case in 2004. It was only the case in 2000 and 2024.
So I'm going to pop
a quarter of a century apart. We are back. We are back to competitive races in a way that we just simply haven't seen before. This cycle is one for the history books.
Yeah.
For a variety of different reasons. And based on the polls today, across all 50 states and in every battleground state, the aggregates say Donald Trump wins the election 287, Kamala Harris 251. A very close race, but Republicans victorious nonetheless. Let's see over the next 4 days that the polls will be proved.
I mean, yeah, and like I said, it all comes down to Pennsylvania. That's the keystone state. It's literally the keystone in the election. It's literally the state that we see here. That's the Pennsylvania one. Wow. Yeah, I feel like Pennsylvania polls are the ones that I really want to. But yeah, it's right here. It's right here, right in the tug of war. It's right in the middle. I am throwing in the oh my god. I'm going to throw in the URL for this channel if you want to give them a follow. They're called Let's Talk Elections. Give them a follow if you want. But yeah, we're back to close elections. If that's what you like. I think that what he's saying, I'm like wondering where the "we are so back" is from. I'm guessing it is speaking to the so
all right,
2000 was an incredibly close election. All right, most elections are not close. If you look at Obama in 2008, he won by a lot. Obama in 2012, he won by a decent amount, not as much as 2008. Trump in Trump's a weird one because his actual electoral victory was by a pretty substantial margin, and yet he managed to lose the election in the popular vote. Of course, popular vote is not how a president is chosen, it's electors. So he took the presidency that year. Another election in this century where the winner of the popular vote did not win the election, lost the electoral vote, was 2000 with Al Gore and George W. Bush. And I think that's the last really close one. If you look at Bill Clinton's wins, those were not terribly close. If you look at George H.W. Bush's win in, 1988, pretty decisive, really decisive against Dukakis. Both of Reagan's wins were very decisive, especially the 1984 election. Carter blew out Ford. Most U.S. elections are pretty decisive, at least electorally speaking. And we're looking at one here that's going to be close, both in both in terms of the popular vote and in terms of the electoral vote, potentially. We don't know for sure. We don't know.
all right, guys.
What does Chink Uger got for us, though? I wonder.
What is going on in this election? Kamala Harris takes the lead in the final weekend. What? Wait till you get a load of this.
Oh, Senzu Bean's coming in with the Iowa electoral news.
Kamala Harris now leading in Iowa.
Yeah, so if you just came in, make sure to rewatch the VOD, because I talk about the Iowa. Oh, that's what Jink is talking about as well. I thought he might have something more than just the Iowa numbers.
What the Jesus? Okay, so I want to break down all the polls for you guys, and I'm going to tell you the two key demographics that are helping Kamala Harris take the lead here, maybe win the election. This is stunning. I really can't believe it. So I want to tell you all about it. First of all, remember, guys, not only do we have the live show every day at 6 o'clock Eastern, and you should be checking that out, because stuff like this happens all of a sudden. Like, we're about to go on air, something breaks, and it's just amazing and exciting and dramatic. And let alone on election day. Oh my God, do not miss the Young Turks on election day. First of all, we're not going to do like, oh, hey, we want this person to win, so we're going to pretend they're winning. No, we're going to give you actual facts so you know exactly who's winning, whether we like it or not. And in this case, it might turn out that we do like it. And so it's going to be super exciting. We're starting at noon.
Jink is hit or miss for me. Yeah, actually he is, even recently, right? We saw recently his on air debate against Anna Kasparian over a really simple question about whether Trump is a threat to democracy or not. It should be pretty easy to answer, right? Whether Trump has got authoritarian tendencies, and he was trying to talk Anna down from her point of view, and then recently he tweeted. I didn't go over this, did I? I guess we'll go over this next. Right, so if you don't know, we're going to cover Sam Seder next. That's what the main stream is going to be all about. We're going to watch the entirety of Tim Pool versus Sam Seder. Now, Sam talks about Anna Kasparian during that appearance, and Jink did not like what Sam had to say. Very much coming after Sam Seder, so not quite as impressive there.
And you could catch all of it at tyt.com. It'll just be on the main page at tyt.com.
Will Anna or Ben be there? Wait, what? No. It's Sam versus Tim Pool. We're not.
We'll have polling results, exit polling, the latest.
Are you talking about Ben Glebe? Oh my God, I hate that guy.
News that day, all of it underneath the video too. So make sure you go to tyt.com on election day, starting at noon Eastern and all the way through well over 12 hours that day. Okay, so let me break it down for you guys. New poll out from a really reliable pollster that has nailed it.
I think he's just going over what we already saw, and it looks like the Bulwark's got this story too. Kyle Kulinski has this story. Everyone's got this story. What is this shit though?
We're gonna get to Trump in a second. Connor East Pans literally texted me the Trump deep throat thing.
So for those of you who missed the Trump, I think it's under like what Trump goes down. There it is. That's one for the ages. That's one for the ages. And in case you're wondering, right, did he do this by accident? Is he just this out of it? Is this a senior moment? No. He is purposefully emulating oral on his microphone. Right? He's pissed off. He's that pissed off about the fact that they didn't place his microphone well. You know what it is? You know what it is you put the microphone where you think the person's going to be, right? So how tall do you think the person is? That's where you put the microphone, right? Trump famously wears, what do you call them? Lifts, yeah. He wears lifts in his shoes, right? He wears these things in his shoes that make him appear taller than he really is. And so when somebody puts the microphone down here, he's insulted because you're like, you think that I'm that short. No, I'm 6'2". And it's like, okay, yeah, 6'2" with lifts. That's right. That was why when he got shot at, he was like, get my shoes, give me my shoes, right? He didn't want anybody to see how, yeah, and he's not short. He's like, I don't know, 5'10", 5'11". He's pretty tall. But it's like something about that 6 foot psychological, advantage of being a big man that he just needs. So yeah, he's massively pissed off at the fact that they underestimated his height, and he's going to he's going to emulate a certain set of actions here. Right? This is what he'll be doing to Vladimir Putin if he's reelected. And there we go. I thought he was like 6'3". I mean, with the lifts, he is. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I don't vote for president based on how tall they are. But the dude is just obsessed with, oh no, I know what that next one's gonna be. Oh my god, chat, I cannot scroll down. I would show you more stuff, but if I scroll down, there's literally a picture of him going down on a cartoon of him going down on Putin. And I don't want to risk it for the biscuit. But yeah, we're gonna go over Tim Pool versus Sam Cedar. If you haven't seen that yet, we'll probably be continuing on the YouTube full scale stream, the YouTube full screen stream. We'll be continuing on Twitch under nocommentchick CC. If you want to join us there, I'm probably gonna end the short stream in a second here. Although I almost don't want to end it yet because look at this. We are at 10,000. Oh no! Oh no, chat, we're at 11,004. We got 11,004 subs. Yeah, we just crossed the 11,000 line, so thank you. And welcome new subs. I'll try to, just so you know what my channel's got right now, what we're doing. We've got, I do a live stream about 5 to 6 days a week, all right? And because I'm doing, and it's like an 8-hour live stream. It's a very long live stream, very comprehensive. We go over politics. We go over what's happening in the streaming space. We go over controversies that are happening on Twitch, on YouTube, etc. Stuff like that. I think it's a pretty interesting stream. So yeah, look for that. I'm always streaming, and I'll do a short stream when we're talking about politics, and then I'll do a full-scale stream for the rest of it. But if you want to join us in the full-scale stream, go right ahead. I'll go ahead and link that to you. I can reload this page here. If you want to join us, and you're welcome to join us. So we're going to be talking about Sam Cedar. We're going to be I'm going to be reacting to the Sam Cedar versus Tim Pool debate. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and join us. If not, it's been nice, and I'll catch you on the next Shorts Live. Here we go. I'm going to give you the link to that. There you go. There you go. There you go if you want to come over. And otherwise, I will see you later. Much love, short stream, and much love to the mods. Those mods are working hard. So we're going to end the stream right here, and I'll see you on the other side.